Yep, I know. I'm late. Well, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another review. Just gonna be me again. So, for the 500 kind of / 600 subscriber special at this point, but primarily 500 subscriber special review is what we're doing today. And today we're going to be talking about Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes. This video is probably not going to be as long as some of my other reviews, just because there was a lot to talk about with this show, and I really feel like a lot of this show really needs to be experienced like when you watch it, because this show is something else. But we'll start off with the big thing first. Well, not the big thing, but one of the big things. So the main thing is the animation style. So with the other animated shows we've talked about, between Armored Adventures and Spectacular Spider-Man, this animation lines up a lot more with Spectacular Spider-Man in the fact that it's very much 2D animation and not so much 3D like Armored Adventures, but it looks so good. All of the designs of the characters look so comic accurate. Whether you're talking about the heroes or the villains, everything looks so comic accurate. And that's one major thing about the show, is the fact that this show adores the comics, which we'll touch on a lot more when we start getting to some of the storylines. But animation-wise, this show looks amazing. When I look at these characters, I truly believe that I am looking at these comic characters. I truly believe I am seeing Iron Man, I'm seeing Captain America, and every design just looks amazing. And the way the show looks is just so vibrant. The colors just pop, and it looks so good. Obviously, like what I just said, this show loves the comics. I don't think I've seen a more comic accurate adaptation of these characters really in my life. Rather, well, not really in my life, I guess I should say, because there are a lot of comic versions of the characters where they can definitely be put on par with this show, but this show, just, the people who wrote this show, whenever they wrote an episode about any specific character, whether it be like a specific hero or specific villain, they did their research on the character, they did their research on the storylines, and they just paid so much attention to how the characters acted, their motivations, and they just got them so perfectly. I cannot praise the show anymore for how comic accurate it is. Now, another thing that I want to talk about, which I kind of jump around on when I talk about this, Armored Adventures I talked about at the very end, Spectacular Spider-Man I talked about at the beginning, but this theme song, but now I'm not alone. See, this is one of those theme songs where I never skip it. I never skipped it once. And one thing the closest thing I have to a nitpick in season 2 is the fact that season 2 kind of trimmed down the theme song and made it more of a Nick Fury monologue, and then put a little bit of the theme song at the very end, which is something I kind of wish they didn't do, to be honest, because I really liked having that full song in the entire first season. But the song is still great. I never skipped the opening once, and it's definitely a favorite theme song of mine in terms of TV shows. Not my favorite, but it's like top 5, I'll say. Yeah, top 5. Now, one interesting thing I kind of want to talk about the show is how the show starts. So this show has a really great first episode with the fact that when the show starts, it's the OG lineup of the Avengers, not from the movies, but from the comics. When the comics started, it was just Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Ant-Man, and Wasp. And that's how the breakout episodes, that's how the team starts. But what's interesting about the show is the fact that it has mini episodes beforehand that you can watch to get an idea for the characters before the show officially starts. But again, an interesting thing about that is like that most of them weren't on television. The only episode that was televised for the mini origin episodes was the Iron Man episode. And again, another interesting about that is the fact that every other character gets kind of like an origin story in their mini episode. But two of the ones that don't are Iron Man and Hulk. Because of the fact that this show started airing in 2010, if I remember correctly, which means that Iron Man 2 either would have just come out or was about to come out. So people had just seen the origins of Iron Man and the Hulk in the movies. They would already have a good idea of what those origins are. So they didn't necessarily need them, but they gave origins for Thor. They gave some origins for Captain America. And I just thought it was really cool how they didn't necessarily make it to where you had to watch the mini episodes, but it still adds something to the story when you watch them, because you get more of an idea of why the character has the motivations that they do, whether you're talking about Black Panther, or to just get an idea of how the characters act and how their personalities are. Because again, with the Iron Man episode, you could see a lot of similarities to the MCU Iron Man, but that's also kind of what makes this Iron Man up there with MCU Iron Man as one of the best versions of this character. I will say he's probably the second best, and I could see an argument made for the fact that he's tied with MCU Iron Man. I'm obviously putting Armin Adventures in the top 3 because bias, but yeah, and that's another thing to just go ahead and talk about it. All the characters are so much fun to watch. Like, I've already talked about Iron Man, but this Captain America is, when I think of Captain America, once again, he's tied with Chris Evans as being probably my favorite Captain America. And again, with other characters, like this Thor is once again one of my favorite Thors. And I mean, I really can't praise it enough just by the fact that every single character in this show are just some of my favorite versions of these characters. And the fact that this show kind of gives some spotlight to, at the time, to characters that weren't that much of the spotlight before. Because I mean, with Ant-Man, this was how I got introduced to Ant-Man as a character. This is how I knew him as Hank Pym. And when Scott Lang is introduced in season 2, I was like, well, who the heck is this guy? I don't care about him. So when the Ant-Man movie came around, I already had a good idea of who Scott Lang was, and then the movie made me love Scott Lang even more than Hank Pym. So coming back to this show, and it's just like, you see so many different characters. You see so many different angles from like different perspectives of different characters in the Marvel Universe. There's an entire episode where the Avengers are barely in it, and it's about Hank Pym trying to get his stolen tech back from Scott Lang, and he hires Luke Cage and Iron Fist. I cannot speak enough about this, but just the way this show did its storylines were just all so good. And the fact that they were all set up at payoff, like how there are some storylines they'll mention earlier or they'll talk about earlier, and then they'll go back to them later on. And I want to talk about some of my favorite storylines in this show. I want to start off with Ultron. Favorite Ultron. This is how I want Ultron to be. Now, I did say in Age of Ultron, I don't mind the type of Ultron that is in that movie because it's more like comedic. I'm okay with that, but this show only had Ultron in about 4 episodes, which is about the length, a little less than the length of a movie, which makes me think that they could have pulled off this menacing, scary Ultron in the movies. So, but even besides that, this is just such a great Ultron. This episode he's in, he is so terrifying. He is such a ginormous threat that he feels like a threat. And it's always, when I see that I'm about to watch an Ultron episode, I always get so pumped because I know I am in for one of the best episodes in this show, which is pretty tough to say because just about all the episodes are pretty darn amazing. But speaking of amazing, the best episodes in this show are hands down every single episode that has to do with Kang the Conqueror. If the MCU Kang is anything like this Kang, we are going to get one of the best versions of Kang the Conqueror ever. Because the 3-episode arc in season 1 are my favorite episodes in the entire show. Because of the fact that Kang legit has a point. He feels like such an intimidating threat by the fact that he essentially wipes the floor with all of them. And it really gives some good development for Iron Man. And when he comes back in season 2 and you get the new Avengers, it's just, oh my gosh, it's so good. Kang is by far my favorite villain in this show. And all of his episodes are some of my favorites in the entire show and in any TV show, period. They are so amazing, and I really hope that the MCU Kang is just as good as this Kang. Which I know is a high bar, but with the actor they've got, and from what we've seen in the trailers, it's got potential. Jonathan Majors has got potential. Now, one thing that unfortunately this show did suffer, just like all the other Marvel shows around this time, was that this show did get, not canceled, but it didn't get renewed for a season 3. Which is kind of unfortunate because of the fact that they were setting up, they were going to set up a lot of other storylines. They said in season 3 they were going to bring in Civil War. They said they were going to do Avengers versus X-Men, which those would have been cool, but they weren't exactly set up a whole lot in the previous seasons. But season 2, well, they said in season 3 they were going to bring in Ragnarok, which they were setting up in season 2. So that was the only plot line that they sort of left up in the air. But even with that, with the final episode of this show having Galactus come in, and the final shot of the show where it's like, sort of like how it's been in the theme songs, it makes the show feel like it had such a satisfying end, regardless of the fact that it didn't get to finish all of its storylines. And it just makes it to where it's tricky for me to want to rewatch Spectacular Spider-Man a little bit, just because I know the show did not have the most happiest of endings. It didn't feel like it ended on that much of a satisfying note. But with Armored Adventures and Earth's Mightiest Heroes, they felt like that even though they had storylines that were kind of left up in the air, they ended in such a satisfying way that makes me want to keep going back and rewatching them. And with Earth's Mightiest Heroes, it's just having Galactus be the final villain that they fight, when you already had so many other times where they fought so many other villains throughout Marvel. It just makes it satisfying enough to where I'm like, okay, this show ended on a good note. But, and of course, one of the final things I want to talk about is the voice acting. When I think of these characters, I think of these voices. In terms of voice, just voice acting wise, I think of Eric Loomis as Iron Man. He is the definitive Iron Man voice for me. I can't remember all the actors' names. I think of this Captain America voice. I think of this Hulk voice, even though he's in just about everything. This Thor voice is pretty definitive for me. And even when you bring in some of the new Avengers characters, you had Steve Blum come in as Wolverine, aka my favorite Wolverine voice actor. And it's just about almost every single voice are the definitive voices for these characters. But there is one character I would like to talk about, and that would be our friendly neighborhood wall crawler of Spider-Man. Now, unfortunately, this character suffered a little bit of a, let's see, what's the correct word I'm looking for? A predicament. He landed in a bit of a predicament, where he was originally going to be voiced by Josh Keaton, which is, at the time, was the definitive Spider-Man voice. Now it's Yuri Lowenthal. But Josh Keaton is still, like right here, behind Yuri Lowenthal. But it was going to be Josh Keaton, and this Spider-Man was supposed to be the legit Spectacular Spider-Man. But because of all this stuff happening at the time with Disney buying Marvel, and then, all of that stuff was happening, and unfortunately, Marvel sold the TV rights of Spider-Man to Marvel, but not the rights to Spectacular Spider-Man. So they unfortunately, that's why that show got canceled. I know we didn't talk about that in the review, but that's unfortunately why that show ended up getting canceled. But Josh Keaton did record all of his lines for Spider-Man in this show, and then because Ultimate Spider-Man was starting around the time that the show was ending, they switched to Drake Bell, which I don't hate Drake Bell as Spider-Man. Like, everybody dogs on him, but I actually kind of like his voice as Spider-Man. It's just Josh Keaton is obviously the definitive voice. So if you would ask me to keep Josh Keaton, yes, then perfect. But even still, I don't hate the fact that they changed it to Drake Bell to be the voice of Spider-Man in this show, but I would have absolutely preferred it to be Josh Keaton. And then I would say that just about every single voice in this show are the definitive versions of those characters. But the fact that in my head, I still kind of see this Spider-Man as a Spectacular Spider-Man, just because of some of the stuff he uses. Like, the spider light was something that really we only saw in Spectacular. So, to me, I see this as a Spectacular Spider-Man, but I also don't mind seeing this Spider-Man as kind of his own person. But yeah, nothing to do about it. But I still loved seeing Spider-Man in this show, and yeah, every other voice actor, definitive version of these characters. So I think that's honestly about all I do have to say. If I do have anything else, I will add them in later, but that's about all I have to say for this show, in all honesty. And to be quite honest, for my rating, I think this show is better than everything in the MCU. Now, I know I've given several things in the MCU a 10 out of 10, but this show it loves the comics, it adores its characters, it loves its storylines. When it makes a story, it knows exactly what it's doing, it knows how to do it correctly, and I don't think I could tell you guys a single bad episode in this show, or really a single bad character, at least in my opinion. And yeah, I'm giving the show a 10 out of 10. Now, again, I know, I give a lot of things a 10 out of 10, but this is just like definitive. Like, this show, I think, is a legit 10 out of 10 because it loves its comics, it loves its source material, it loves its own characters, and it gives them so much respect to where I just cannot think of any legit problems with this show. And while yes, I do give a lot of things a 10 out of 10, some of those other 10 out of 10s were just signified those are my favorites. If I'm going like, if I were to trim down and say, what do I legitimately think is a 10 out of 10, like objectively, at least to me, this is one of the ones I'm saying. I think this show is better than everything in the MCU. This is probably my favorite TV show of all time. It's between this Spectacular and The Mandalorian, but in all honesty, it's more between this and The Mandalorian, because Spectacular is amazing, but the ending just makes it tricky for me to want to rewatch it because I'm just thinking, oh, I'm not going to see a satisfying ending. Whereas Earth's Mightiest Heroes, not everything might have gotten wrapped up, but I know I'm still going to see a satisfying ending. And I'm saying it. This show is better than every single thing in the MCU. No matter how good stuff like Infinity War is, no matter how good No Way Home is, or the Avengers, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, no matter how incredible all of those things are, I think this show is better than all of those. And some of the only Marvel projects I think come close, or in some cases are better, are stuff like Into the Spider-Verse. But yeah, I just wish that Marvel had kept up with this kind of storytelling and character development for their later shows, because no matter how much I love shows like Avengers Assemble, it's not that great. It started focusing a little too much on riding the MCU bandwagon, and that's where that show kind of fell off. But that's a story for another day. So, I know I didn't talk a whole lot about this show, but let me just say, you have to see this show. This is one of those cases where I don't think words I could say about some other parts of the show can do it justice. If you have not seen this show, you need to fix that. Because there is some stuff I didn't talk about that are just done so incredibly well that you guys have to see. So believe me when I say, you will not be disappointed. Check out this show. It's on Disney+. It's 2 seasons, 26 episodes per season, and it is truly worth it. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for getting me to 500 subscribers. I did not even imagine I would get this many subscribers in this small amount of time. And the fact that at the time of me recording this, which is Christmas Eve, is the fact that I did not expect to already be almost halfway to 600. It's just mind-blowing. So I cannot thank you guys enough. And for my next subscriber special, it's going to be for 750. And I am torn between either doing the Lego Batman movie or the 2017 Power Rangers movie. So I'm still thinking on that. If you guys have any input of which one you want, please feel free to let me know. But until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. See you later, webheads.